Okay, welcome everybody today. Thanks everybody for joining us. We're very excited that so many people have taken an interest in demand response, and I was just mentioning to the others here that it has been quite a year for demand response so far. So today we're going to go through some of those examples and what's been happening in the market. Firstly, we're just going to aim to run this for about 45 minutes. We'll have about 30 minutes for the presentation and 15 minutes for questions at the end. So if you've got any questions, just enter them into the screen there that you've got in front of you, and we will attempt to get through as many as we can at the end of the presentation. And if we don't get to, we'll come back to you individually and try to answer your questions as we go through it. We'll also be sending out the slides and the recordings of this as well at the end. So with me today I've got David Evans, so I'll let David introduce himself.
Good morning, good afternoon everyone. I'm the Director of Commercial Engineering for Flow Power.
We've got Alex.
Good afternoon. I am the demand response lead here, managing the programs we run.
And myself, obviously, I'm the CEO and Director of Flow Power. So just very briefly, for those who don't know who Flow Power is, we're a licensed electricity retailer operating in Australia, and our goal is well, essentially wholesale energy, but our goal in doing that is to take all the typical or all the tools that a typical retailer, your current retailer, would use to buy their energy, and to make all those tools available to our end use customers and more. So that means things like obviously access to spot market, access to derivatives through swaps and caps, but we're very, very much focused also on providing solutions to our end users through demand response, and now we're beginning to look at batteries, large scale renewables are some of the big things that we're doing. So we are an electricity retailer like the other retailers in the market, but we're a very different type of retailer motivated by very different things. So for today, we're going to just give a brief summary of what's happened most recently in demand response. We'll look at the outcomes of the results. We'll go through an example of how a business would respond or how they are responding, and we'll take next steps and questions. So we're going to start briefly with a market overview to look at what's happened in January. So everyone would be partially aware, and even if you're not really involved in the electricity market, you've probably known about it because your lights may have gone out in January. But we've had quite an eventful period in January where we had around the 24th and 25th of January. We had some higher temperatures, and that was combined with a number of market outages that were a bit unexpected, weren't they, Alex?
Yes, there were tube leaks at 3 power stations throughout that week that reduced the available capacity significantly in the electricity market. And
the tube leaks are fairly serious for a power station?
Very serious. It means that the power station's offline for anywhere from about 7 days to 14 days before they can get back up and running, providing electricity again.
Yeah. So, and when they happen, the generator goes down, and it happened at well, we knew this summer we were going to be short of power or close to the thresholds, and combined with significant failures of those generators that put us in a bit of a predicament. So that resulted in obviously us hitting the market cap of $14,000, $14,500, and in the market we have what's called a cumulative price cap that essentially, I guess, protects the market in the long term. It's pretty rare we hit it. I think the last time we hit it was way back in 2009 around Black Saturday. So it's been a full 10 years, almost to the day, because I think that was around the 29th of January. So, but essentially what they do is they just sum up the price over the past 7 days, and if it hits a particular cap, then the price gets reset to $300 a megawatt hour. So we had that happen over a 2-day period. We had about a 6-hour period one day, and then a 2 or 3 hour period the next day, and hit that cap. So yeah, it was a pretty significant event.
It's about as bad as the market can get, right?
Yeah, and for anyone, it's very true actually, because often there is a maximum,
and it's
a threshold.
Fair to say it's a 1 in 10 year event.
Yeah.
I think the last time we saw this was 2009.
Yep. 29th of January 2009. So we're out by almost to the day, literally almost to the day. So it's amazing how time flies, because it doesn't seem that long ago, Black Saturday, but it's 10 years now. So it does sort of show you though, when you're managing your energy, the unpredictable nature of the market. We had these generator failures, and that put us in a bad position. Had that not happened, we would have probably got through those days without maybe even no high prices at all. So it's those unknown factors that you've got to plan for when you're managing your energy. So we want to talk about demand response today. In its simplest form, demand response is responding to market signals or responding to something. So the main ones are responding to price, or in this case, constraints in the market. But it can be other things. It could be responding to your demand tariff pricing. Could be responding to the local distribution network that might have constraints. And sometimes it even can be just local site constraints. So sometimes I've seen people implement demand management or demand response in response to a limitation within the physical site, like a size cable transformer at a site. There are other things, obviously. There's things like FCAS markets and so forth that you can respond to as well. Today, though, we want to focus on the two main types of demand response that have been very active this year: the Emergency Demand Response Program, called the BRET program, and wholesale demand response, where we respond to essentially the market price. These are the two main things that we're going to focus on today and try to explain the difference between those two things. So fundamentally, the BRET program is a reserve. That stands for, Alex?
The Reliability and Emergency Reserve Trader Mechanism.
Yes, that's the right term. So that's really in response to a direct physical shortfall in
Yeah, it's effectively AEMO's response to, prior to forced load shedding or forcefully switching power off to consumers, actually asking customers to voluntarily or participate in this program who are signed up with it to actually reduce load prior to them having to do that.
And there's a particular, we reach LRR2,
Yes.
Which is a lack of reserve state of 2, which is the one step before forced load shedding, isn't it? I think that's correct.
Represents the failure of a single power station would bring the grid down.
Yeah. So we're really at that threshold, and actually in January we actually really went to LRR3, didn't we?
Yes.
And that's where the rolling blackouts start. So the wholesale demand response is obviously indirect response to price. So based on your threshold, we hit a certain level, and then people turn off their power to try and reduce their impact of that cost. They often occur at the same time, but not always. And this year's a good example where they did deviate in terms of how they respond. So with the RET program, we've been running, it's been actively run for the last, it's been in place for a long time, but it was actually called upon in the last 2 years. We've had, last year there was 2 hours duration of RET events. This year we've had a total of 10 hours so far. Typically they're 1 to 4 hours. This year it was a bit unusual in that we got called upon for a bit longer than we expected. So yeah, the RET program was called upon this year quite significantly. But I'm not sure in terms of cost. I actually don't think this year is going to be any more expensive than last year, but I haven't confirmed that yet. But I did hear a rumor that the procured RET reserve was at a significantly lower cost than it was last year.
Yes, the market is paying less for this requirement because providers such as Flow Power have offered a more efficient service into the market.
Yeah. So I think we'll see that as it comes out. But one of the outcomes of the RET program this year will be eventually across the market additional charges on everyone's bill. Those who participated obviously get the benefit of the significant reduction in payment from that. So in terms of price demand response, we've got the number of events that we managed over those same 2 years. So we do have more events, but it's still not significant. We've got eight events last year in SA and Victoria, and then this year we've got 10 events there across all the states. Most of these are occurring in January to March. I think New South Wales is a slight exception to that. They had an outage, I think, in June that caused it to be called upon from memory.
Yes.
To push prices up. And normally our threshold there is about $500 a megawatt hour. So one of the key things here is it's not a lot of time, it's not a lot of events because they're usually quite short duration. But one of the things that if we looked at how often the market thought it was going to spike, that would be in the hundreds of events.
Yes.
Might also be just worth touching on about why customers do this. The idea being that the customer's buying at the wholesale spot price, and through demand response, they're able to avoid the very worst of the market or the very extreme pricing. In this case, we've picked a value above $500 or 50 cents a kilowatt hour. And that means essentially that they can benefit from the generally lower underlying spot price or wholesale price, but avoid those very high extreme prices. And it's also worth noting that in a normal contract, customers are paying for that certainty through, or the probability of high prices occurring is built into the fixed rates. So this is effectively another way of getting a cost below those fixed rates by avoiding those high prices if they occur. And as Matthew said, they're not overly common, but the impact can be reasonably significant. So
yeah, it's very correct. The savings you're getting by doing the demand response are normally going out to the market. And under a fixed rate contract are built into those costs, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, our analysis from historically over a large sample of time suggests that accessing the spot market with demand response savings are generally around or in excess of about 30% to comparative market. So it's a reasonably significant outcome.
Yeah, it is. And it like that previous slide demonstrated, it doesn't occur that often. It's not a lot of response.
And sometimes you may not need to respond at all, right? We've certainly had years in the Victorian market where no response has been required.
That's right, yeah. Whether that happens in the future again, I'm not sure. We are moving towards a market that needs demand response more, so it's more likely to have a much higher value going forward generally. So the benefits of demand response, the key one David's just spoken about there is just reducing your costs. It can reduce your demand charges, and it allows us to leverage other market revenues that otherwise you would never have access to. And some of those are a little bit more unusual in terms of FCAS revenues as well that can come into it. It does obviously improve reliability across the grid. So we've had customers come to us, particularly geographically remote customers come to us and want to participate in demand response simply because they want to improve the reliability of the local area, not just their own reliability, because they understood when it's under stress, if they're a significant user, they reduce their load, it'll help the market generally. And it will over time, it will reduce costs across the market as well. It's also just efficient and logical demand response. The idea of connecting supply and demand is one of our, for Flow Power anyway, it's one of our key goals is to try and make that connection much stronger.
Make a much more efficient market for everybody.
Yeah, and it's logical. Electricity is such a dynamic commodity. It should be managed. It shouldn't just be used willy-nilly. There are times when you have to, but there's also a lot of times and a lot of things people can do to help manage that. So we're going to move into, Alex is going to take us through some of the results of the demand response. So Alex.
Great, thank you, Matthew. So here we'd like to talk about an example of how a customer actually goes about demand response, the timeline on an actual day when an event has been called. So we can see in the orange line that that's a customer's demand or load. And earlier in the afternoon, Flow Power can provide a forecast, a prediction of a price event occurring. So we can provide some estimate of when that will occur in the afternoon. Later in the afternoon, as it progresses close to that event, we can update our forecast with more certainty as to the precise start time of that event. And then as we get to the late afternoon, we can actually call and predict when this event will happen. And at this point, we issue notifications to our customers to reduce their load or to switch their load over to a backup generator, depending on how the site manages it. Here, the price has then gone to higher levels, and the customers reduce their load and manage to avoid paying any of those high prices. And then Flow Power keeps a constant monitoring of the market price and then advise when the prices have returned to much lower levels, and the customer can return to their full operations. So through this mechanism, Flow Power helps customers effectively avoid high prices within the market and achieve much lower average electricity costs.
Yeah, That's actually a really key point, isn't it? It's not actually, you know, the goal is to achieve a lower average price. So it doesn't have to be precise, does it?
No. And here certainly they, you know, this pricing can sort of be a little bit unstable in the middle period, but the overall outcome is much lower prices for the customer. We can also then look at how a customer can be rewarded for a case of emergency demand response. So this is that RERT program that we talked about earlier. So this RERT program, which is run by the market operator, the AMO, uses what we talk about a baseline. So a baseline is an estimate of how much demand or electricity a customer would be using based on the average consumption of the previous 10 business days, 2 weeks. And the customer is then reduces load, again, based on flow power signals as being advised by the market operator. And they are paid a fixed contracted fee based on the difference between that baseline, that estimated consumption that they would have used, and their actual reduced consumption on the day. And so the difference between that grey and that orange line during the event window is the quantity that they can make revenue, can earn revenue on, which can be quite significant.
As we're about to see.
As we're about to see, yes. So we've got some examples here of actual customer amounts from our RERT events, which were called on the 24th and 25th of January this year. So one of our horticultural customers shut down a number of their pumps on their farm, and they avoided nearly $850,000 in wholesale costs on that afternoon, and made or was paid nearly $450,000 in revenue by participating in the RERT program, which is quite significant for a few hours worth of work. One of our water utilities managed to save a bit over $40,000, earned $40,000 from the RERT payments. And then on top of this particular water utility has backup generators that they were able to switch on and export electricity to the grid. And because the price was quite high, they earned an additional $11,000 in revenue by running those generators for a short period of time. And then we've also got an example of an irrigator that's not possible to do a complete shutdown of their site, but they can partially reduce their load by switching off a handful of pumps, and they can still earn significant revenue in the program and avoid significant costs during these events. It doesn't have to be a complete shutdown of the site to participate in these programs.
This is all over what, a 10-hour period or something?
Yes, these figures are just from 10 hours of participation in the market over 2 days.
Yeah,
is where these values come from.
Yeah.
And these periods were also late afternoon in the 24th, 25th of January.
We had 25th had some morning stuff as well, didn't it?
Just before lunchtime.
Yeah.
So overall, Flow Power has 300 sites. That's specific sites across all of our companies signed up to do demand response in the market. And across our Victorian and South Australian demand response customers, they reduced their load by 93% on average by switching off load or partially shutting down or moving across to backup generation over these 2 days on the 24th and 25th. And these are really significant results for our customers in the amount of money that they saved and the support that they provided to the grid during these stressful times on the grid. And it's important to note too that these were, incredibly unusual days, very hot days. But the response that our customers can provide to the grid is extremely important and very valuable.
Yeah. Just out of interest, because obviously Flow Power as a retailer, we're very focused on this type of customer. If we were to overlay our total retailer load in Victoria on this, our retail book roughly halved in terms of its load output, which makes us extremely unique in a retail sense. No other retailer would have that but it just shows you that across the market, they respond. And this is just the RERT program, isn't it, in terms of response?
This is just our RERT and our wholesale
And
demand
also,
response customers.
So it is most of our customers that respond, but there's potentially even other customers that respond outside of that that aren't in this list.
It may also be worth mentioning that for many customers, demand response is actually a journey. So often customers won't necessarily have identified or be aware that they have capacity to do something in the market. And that something might initially be quite small and evolve over time once they get a better understanding of, one, the frequency, timing and duration of events and what their equipment is able to do. So we've worked with many different industries, many different customers over quite a long period of time to build up effectively a knowledge base of information about that helps our customers understand what's potentially possible. And obviously once customers are able to see the financial rewards, which as previously shown can be substantial, there's obviously a natural incentive to participate to the extent they can. And generally what we find is customers initially are able to do more and more demand response once they understand what's actually required.
And it's also important to remember they don't need to go to 90% reduction as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so most of these customers are very able to manage significant portions of their load, but it absolutely doesn't need to be that. It might just be 20% of their load and you'll get a significant benefit for that too.
Yeah,
so,
certainly.
Yeah.
David, would you like to talk us through how a specific business responded to these events?
Thanks, Alex. So I'm going to talk about one of our horticulture or irrigation customers in particular, which is a large irrigator in northwest Victoria. This particular customer uses an enormous amount of power to irrigate a large crop. And on obviously the 24th and 25th of January were two particularly hot days. This customer is also purchasing on the wholesale market because they've identified there's a significant cost saving that they can gain through reducing load when spot prices are high and effectively buy the lowest parts of the electricity market. So they've been doing that for a while. And more recently, over the last 2 years, they signed on to the RERT program, which was complementary to their existing demand response. And we're going to look at some examples of how that benefited them. In those particular days, obviously they were hot days in that area of which the customer was required to provide water to the trees. They were aware through flow player notifications provided on the 23rd and actually a forecast much earlier than that, that there was likely to be events on the 24th and 25th. That allowed them to pre-plan and pre-irrigate and pre-water their trees so that they could factor in the demand response, which is actually a critical part of how they operate.
From memory, we knew like Monday that week, didn't we? That
it was likely, yeah. Very likely. So yeah, part of that, and we'll get to the next slide we talk about is just in terms of the notification process. I think it's worth also mentioning here that this particular customer has a number of irrigation pumps. It's not actually possible for them to shut down every pump. They can shut down a number of them, or they can reduce their consumption down to a certain level. So that's planned in the way in which they respond, and they will move irrigation around from different parts of their orchard to obviously keep the demand as low as they can. So on Thursday, they responded to the 4-hour event, and then on the Friday the 25th, the grid was still constrained, and so they actually were able to provide additional curtailment or reduce load additionally on the 25th. And interestingly enough, the RERT contract was only for 4 hours with this customer, but the actual market asked us to provide an additional 2 hours, so a 6-hour event. And we contacted our customers asking if they would be able to provide optionally. And this particular customer was able to offer, because of the pre-planning that they'd done, they were able to offer a 6-hour response on the 25th. And you'll see that had fairly significant financial benefit for them.
And not all our customers achieved that, did they? That's
right, yeah. So there was, the expectation was 4 hours. I think it's also worth understanding that this particular customer is in the business of growing a crop. And so watering is a critical part of their infrastructure. So at any point they needed to, they could have turned back on irrigation to protect the crops. So a lot of it is about planning and really understanding what the impacts of the demand response is on their operations. So in terms of how this actually works, Flow Power provide a notification service which I was designed to notify the customer of when an event is likely to occur and the impact to that customer in terms of time and price. And so we did that on, as we said, Wednesday the 23rd was the actual notification of a impending event on the 24th. And at the same time, this particular customer has a number of K-Watch controllers installed on their site that actually monitor the live site data consumption, so the customer could see at any one time how much energy was being consumed live on their sites, so which sites were running and how much power they were consuming. And at the same time, the controller will notify the customer of which sites are scheduled to be shut down. The customer then can determine if they want those sites to be shut down or not. So I think the point I'm making here is the customer is always in control of what demand response actually occurs. So Flow Power will provide the signal and the notification of what we're intending to shut down based on a schedule provided to us. But the customer can say yes or no at any point in time or bring back on loads if they need to. But what it does mean is that the process can be very highly automated. It means that equipment can be reduced very quickly and respond to market events, and then equally important, it can be turned back on very quickly and resume normal operations once the events have completed. Another point to really mention is that we have a team of experts, and Alex being one of them here, that are on standby for our customers all the time during these events. So we have people here that are able to provide information about the market, what's happening, what the price impact is, and what is likely to occur.
It's actually a really good point. I was trying to refer to it before, but we only had 10 or so events in the last year or so, but we would have had hundreds of possible events, and that's part of our job, is to filter that and just try and get our customers to respond to actual events. Not the ones that might happen.
There's a lot of I guess we dare say misinformation provided in the market about what is or isn't going to happen, and it requires a certain set of skill levels to be able to filter through that information and provide a reasonable probability of an event occurring or not, and that's what our team is designed to do here for our customers. So let's get to the interesting parts here. In terms of the outcome for the customer, they were significant. Overall, through responding to the wholesale price or the spot price, they reduced their January cost by 28%. RERT payments made about 70% of their monthly bill, and so the total savings for January about 45%, so nearly half based on this activity. So a fairly significant outcome for this customer, who actually consumes a significant portion of their electricity in December and January. So
got an amazing outcome. So if their price is going to be 10 cents a kilowatt hour, it came out close to 5. So pretty amazing.
So I guess it highlights that even in adverse market conditions like the one we saw on the 24th, 25th, there are actually significant opportunities out there for customers to benefit from that. And this is a great example of how these customers have actually benefited from it.
It's and as we move through, like in terms of next steps, you've got there's numerous things businesses can do to get ready for events. And we're there to basically help you through that process, but it's becoming a lot more common for business to start to investigate this type of activity. And it's logical too, as we move into this new market with large renewable penetration, reliability and price variability will probably become more normal. You've got a couple of choices, haven't you? Go out and enter a fixed rate contract that's going to include all this risk and cost going forward, or start to look at what you can do to help take control yourself.
Exactly.
And we're seeing that more and more. Customers wanting and willing and able to install their own solar, to sign up to corporate VGA, like in front of the meter type offtakes, and now looking to say, well, what's the next part of the piece of the puzzle, and that demand response is a key part of it. It can be done through what we've done here, or it could be done through a battery or a generator, or many things.
I guess the other thing that we do provide is tools to help them make those decisions. So the K-Watch controller, again, I mentioned providing live data and live market pricing information, so the customers can actually make some different choices. So demand response might not be just about avoiding high prices, but it might also be about, and is actually about, taking advantage of when prices are very low. So during the wholesale market, there are times of the day and certainly seasonally when wholesale prices are quite low, and there can be opportunities for customers to benefit by potentially moving, incrementally moving parts of their operations into those times.
Yep.
It's a whole fundamental shift of really being in synchronism with the market.
Yeah, it is. All right, so what we'll do is we'll try to get through a few of your questions. So just get onto the screen there and type in a few of your questions, and we'll start to go through those at the moment. I'll start. Here's a question. Will more businesses be required to do demand response in the future? Is a question I've got here. David?
Sure. I think the answer is, will they be required? There's always a potential for the customer to enter into the type of contract that most are today, which is a fixed rate contract where the customer doesn't have to provide any demand response. The issue will be that those contracts will become increasingly more and more expensive to deal with the fact that additional capacity has to be added into the market to cover shortfalls, as we've seen in the example 24th, 25th. So a much better and more efficient solution would be for the customer to say, well, what could I do to reduce my load during those times? And that would fundamentally result in a better price outcome for me. So in other words, one option is to hand it over to somebody else to manage that risk and pay a premium for that, or actually look at how you're doing it yourself. So I think the broad answer to that question is yes, more businesses, and we're already seeing this, a significant uptake of businesses looking to take on demand response.
So yeah, it's definitely more participation.
Yeah.
Will they be required? The answer to that would be no. It would be customer choice, really, won't it?
I think so, yeah.
Unless it's forced load shedding.
You don't get paid for that.
And that's a really
right.
good point. And some, as you said earlier, some of our customers actually participate in demand response because they know that there's a reasonably high probability they'll have their supply cut as a result of constraint. So
this question comes through here, so asking us essentially summarising the question, if you're participating in RERT, do you also get to participate in essentially get the benefits from the market as well? So Alex, do you have an answer for that one?
Certainly, we've got some customers that were able to provide both. And January the 24th was an example where the price was extremely high and the RERT event was called, and the customer is able to avoid the wholesale cost, avoid that high price, but also provide that reliability to the grid through the RERT program and achieve a payment for that. On the 25th was actually an example where the price was quite high initially, and then it hit that cumulative price threshold that we talked about before. And so the price reduced to a fairly low price. However, there was still a need for reliability supply on the grid, and customers in our RERT program continue to supply that and were paid for that, providing that support service.
So essentially, you can get benefits from both.
Yes.
Interestingly, how the market evolves and whether that continues will be one of the things that there's a lot of discussion in the industry about. Our view would be that yes, you will continue to get benefits from both those schemes because they are different. And we would also argue that the need to encourage demand response, it needs every encouragement that's available in the market. So our view, anything that reduces the incentives to carry out demand response is not a good thing for the market. And making them mutually exclusive would be not a good thing for the market. So at this point, the market's efficient and rewards you for both. And they don't always align, like Alex said.
Certainly.
And we saw that. We saw customers that were just responding, that weren't part of RERT, but were responding to price, start back up once that price dropped, which would have put more pressure on the grid. So how much is the KWatch controller and the price to install any license fees for the controller? So I can answer that one. Every Flow Power customer that we have now gets a KWatch controller for free that signs up from this point forward. So no. So our goal there is to try to make the hardware and the knowledge of data just directly available and very easy and in your hand. So no, there's no barriers in that sense in getting the hardware installed. Is there a critical customer size to participate in the RERT program?
I can answer this.
Yep.
So there isn't because we can aggregate customers. So we have a portfolio that contains a large number of customers, some which are quite large and some that are quite small. So by offering this aggregated portfolio, we can offer this benefit to customers that are a relatively small load. And certainly for the wholesale participation, customers of near any size can receive benefits from avoiding the price or from participating in the wholesale market.
Yep, good. Do you have any customers in Queensland signed up in this program with limited events in Queensland? Is this still viable for the customer?
I can answer that one. The answer is yes, we do have customers in Queensland signed up to this program. I can also say that I remember a time in Queensland when there were many events and the market was a lot more volatile than it is today. So it's probably important to understand that the market can change. Whilst there are a limited number of events today, that could change over time. I think what's also, what's important to mention, and the reason why our customers are signed up to this, is that they're able to access the lower spot market price below the fixed rate contracts. And they know that they have demand response up their sleeve, available to call on if and when they need it. It just so happens that they haven't been called on for it, but that capacity sits there as a latent form of, if you like, insurance for that customer. That means they can deal to high market prices if they needed to. But the real benefit at the moment is they're getting access to low spot pricing and they're doing better than the average market. So that's the reason and the motivation. There isn't a RERT program in Queensland at the moment.
No.
But that could change over time.
Yeah.
There are some network-based programs in Queensland that customers can look at and would be worth looking at. And that's something that we'd be happy to talk about for any specific cases.
Yeah. Thanks, David. How much does it cost to do demand response?
That's a really subjective question, isn't it?
It is a bit.
I think the simple answer is, what is the cost of reducing your load during that period of time, or potentially switching over to an alternative form of energy? So for some customers, demand response will be very cheap and very easy to implement. For others, it will be more expensive. So something like a complex manufacturing process, demand response may be much more limited, and it may be more expensive to implement versus a customer, say an irrigator or a pumping site that has storage capacity. It's probably reasonable to say that any customer, in my view at least, would have some capacity to do something, and that would be where you'd start and then look beyond that. So
probably at the extreme end of the spectrum is a customer that wants to participate and has to install a battery to participate. So
yeah, or a generator.
Or a generator.
Yeah.
So a generator will be a lot cheaper than a battery, so battery is probably at the highest cost level. Generators actually quite cost effective, particularly in SA and Victoria and those states. Actually probably get a good ROI on those two installs. But batteries are definitely at the higher end, but they also bring a lot of other benefits. They do, and that's where pretty much any business can do it.
Emerging market, that one, definitely.
Yeah, it is. Someone's had a follow-up question there to the minimum size. I've asked whether 40 megawatt hours can participate. So yeah, yes, they can. In terms of participating with flow power, that's something you'd have to talk to us about the nature of your load. We're a CNI retailer, so we're looking for customers generally a bit bigger than that. But just give us a call about the nature of your load and whether it can work. But the RERT program itself can amalgamate residential properties if you wish. Flow power doesn't do that at the moment, but there are other companies out there doing that. So yeah, so the cumulative price threshold, and how does it apply in all states? So
I can answer this.
Yep.
So the cumulative price threshold does apply in all states. It's calculated as the rolling 7-day sum of the spot market prices, which is specific to each state. So when the extreme events happened on the 24th and 25th of January, that only impacted South Australia and Victoria, which were experiencing the extremely hot weather and high demand. So yes, short answer is it does apply in all states, but recently it's only occurred in South Australia and Victoria.
Yeah, so essentially what happens is you need about, I think it's about eight intervals, 8 half hours
About 8 hours
8 hours
of very high pricing, yes.
$14,000. If you add that up, that's roughly around the price threshold.
Yep.
And then once you hit it, then what happens is it's a rolling 7-day window. So that essentially holds those prices down for about a week.
Yes.
And a week later, the high price starts to roll out of that window, and then you're back in a market that could start to have more volatility.
Yep.
That'd be correct, wouldn't it? So it's a good mechanism, but it's an important mechanism to understand for anyone looking to participate, because it's the worst case outcome.
Yeah. It's a protection insurance policy.
That's right.
In the market.
And it's 8 hours at vol, so at a very high price. So if the price was not at vol, it's half that, then it'd be 16 hours. So it varies a bit that way. So there's a few other questions here. We are getting towards the end of our time, but we've got a bit more time. So who qualifies for the demand response program? So we probably answered that a bit, but pretty much anyone, isn't it? There's really no one that wouldn't qualify.
It's effectively the entity that's signing with, say, AMO for the RERT program is the one that qualifies, and then they can then enter into their customers can effectively enter into that program through that. We'll call it an aggregator or retailer, so yes, there is really theoretically no limit on how big or small or who can, as long as you can respond or are able to respond.
Yeah. And someone's asked whether they actually need hardware. Like, do you actually have to change anything? Do you have to install stuff? Is there like a demand response thing? I guess the answer to that is no, once again.
No, some of our customers it can be as simple as switching equipment off by hand.
Yeah.
Some of our irrigators can manually switch off pumping load on the farm. But that said, we also have customers with some very sophisticated demand response mechanisms where they have computer controlled systems to shut down equipment or to switch their load over to generators. So it's really up to what the customer can employ.
Without getting into the specifics, we had two RERT products that were available in Victoria, and one was a fast responding, one was a slow responding. The faster responding one did require some hardware and some automation than the slow responding one, and it was obviously worth more money to the customer. So there was an incentive there to participate in the fast responding RERT.
Yeah. So we sort of covered this a little bit too, but how if I don't have any flexibility to move my operations or reduce consumption, can I participate? So, on the complete surface, if you've got absolutely no flexibility, then yes, you still can participate because you can install equipment, can't you?
Yeah. So in that particular scenario, you'd want to understand what that means, but potentially it might mean you switch to a generator or battery either now or sometime in the future. But maybe it's worth looking at what is discretionary load in that operation, and that's where our engineers could potentially help with that.
Yeah, that's right. So often there might be flexibility when you didn't realise it, but yeah, there are cases where there is none. So therefore, you need to look at other equipment data. So
yeah,
like generators and batteries, and they can all be installed in such an environment where there's absolutely no interruption to your supply, and completely seamless when it's synchronized.
Looks like we're out of time, doesn't it?
So we've got one final question here. So how is the profit split with respect to the revenues that you get, and essentially they're asking how does what does Flow Power earn? So David,
yeah. So our model is a transparent model with our customers. So we essentially pass through almost all of the benefit that's received. So in terms of the wholesale pass-through, the customer is fully exposed and pays or receives the benefit of either paying the spot price or avoiding the spot price. So that's a complete pass-through. Flow Power has an agreed margin that they charge based on our supplier service.
And that applies whether you've actually currently got a hedging structure or you're a part of our Power Active product. You essentially get the benefit of avoiding that price directly through on your bill.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point that our customers for a customer who doesn't want to or can't shed load, we may put what we call a hedge in place, which basically gives them a fixed price outcome. It's similar to a fixed rate price that a customer would pay. But under this model, if a customer, there's still a significant incentive for a customer to reduce load, as they'll effectively be paid the difference between the hedge fixed price and what the spot price is. So that does create some fairly significant opportunity. We call it the ability to participate in demand response without any obligation.
Yeah, it's an important point. You don't have to be on spot. Essentially, all our products provide benefit for the reductions. And then on the RERP program?
So on the RERP program, again, we negotiate an outcome with AEMO in terms of we put a bid effectively in to bid for the service, and then that's either accepted or negotiated with AEMO as an outcome, and that generally has a couple of different components to it, of which are paid to our customers based on their performance. So obviously the payments to the customer are dependent on how they perform, and that's both based on obviously how much load they reduce, but also what their baseline was for that particular day. So then we provide a very fair, I suppose, an equitable method of dishing out those payments that we receive from the market.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're almost out of time. I'll mention that we've got a couple of other webinars coming up, and one of those we just touched on, PowerActive, is one of our new products that allows you to participate in demand response, but gives you very solid price certainty that reflects the wholesale market price. So we'll sign up for that one, because that'll give you a lot of more information. So particularly for a customer that
is new to demand
response, it's an excellent.
Wants to dip your toe in without any risk or any possible impact.
Yep.
Whereas it's really demand response with only upside.
That's right.
Yeah. There's no downside to it.
Yeah. So you don't have to know that much to get involved. It's not that different to what you're probably doing at the moment. So yeah, well, I appreciate all your questions. We still had a few more that we didn't quite get through, but I think we got through the bulk of them. So anyone we didn't answer questions for, we'll come back to you on. But thank you for your time, and I hope that you've managed to get something out of it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.